No. Okay. But when we do have an offline chat with them, I'll get Marshall to send that out to you guys. All right. So we've got these 5 steps, and I've gone through in terms of what does screening mean. Okay. Basically, what we showed on the onboarding system, it takes the customer that you're trying to onboard, and it screens that customer and their related parties against a list of individuals and entities that are sitting on a targeted financial sanctions list, right? And if there's any matches, and again, matches can be both direct matches and potential matches, and potential matches occur as a result of fuzzy matching logic, which occur in most screening solutions, if you've got a screening solution. If you don't have a screening solution, then you are just eyeballing it, which is also not too bad, right? Those DNFBP representatives that are in the room, just give me a quick show of hands, who you are. Anybody from the DNFPB? I've got Ronald there. Is it Marvin? Uh, when you guys are screening for customers, do you guys do it manually, or do you use a screening solution? Are you aware? Manual. So you enter the name into a system, and then it gives out a result, and you need to analyze that. So yeah, that's typically what happens in smaller institutions, and it can become a problem where your customer base starts to become larger. You can't get bogged down doing manual screening when you've got hundreds and thousands of customers waiting to be onboarded. Okay. So it also tells you who needs to be screened and gives you the rationale in terms of why screening is important. This is important when you're taking this material and you're filtering it down to the people in your organization that need to know what and how to do this. Okay, freezing assets without delay. Right, this is takes you through the whole process, what it means, the Zimbabwean legal context in terms of why it needs to be done, what it is that as a compliance officer you need to do, and common mistakes to avoid. Right, when they say it needs to be done immediately, it has to be done immediately. There's no waiting for approval from your committees or certain authorization committees that need to happen. It has to be done immediately. Okay, prevent funds from being made available. So once you've identified who the individual is whose funds need to be frozen, right? You need to ensure that you've got processes and procedures in place that will not allow funds coming into that individual's account because you've got it frozen. So your processes need to ensure full lockdown of these accounts, and it has to be all accounts. There's instances where individuals could have multiple products within a financial institution, right? Your process or your procedure that you've documented and operationalized that deal with what happens or what you need to do when you found somebody on a targeted financial sanctions list need to include how you lock down every single product that person would have access to. Okay? Escalate, report, and record. I think this is pretty straightforward, right? In terms of internal escalations, who needs to be made aware of this? Obviously, senior and executive management. Anybody in that chain that would end up potentially with access to that account needs to be aware of what's been happening. All right, and obviously they need to have a certain level of seniority within the business unit or within the product area. Okay, you need to report to the FIU and you need to record the evidence. The evidence, again, is very important. Your screening evidence showing you the matching, showing you the rationale that you applied, showing the escalations, and the process that was followed to freeze the assets and block all accounts linked to the individual. Okay. So in terms of applying through the customer lifecycle, I think this is pretty straightforward. From onboarding all the way through to client termination, you need to ensure that you have the processes in place to screen the client against your targeted financial sanctions list, both at onboarding and on an ongoing basis. And you've got those controls in place to ensure that if identified, you can freeze those accounts, prevent funds from being made available to him, escalate to the FIU and to senior management, and ensure that as on the whole, your organization and individuals in the organization are protected. Okay, so this is a simple TFS decision tree, and this is for you to look at and and you can use it when you're doing your own training. A simple thing in terms of true match, what it is that you need to do, or false match, what needs to happen. Okay, and it's basically a diagrammatic expression of all of these, most of the slides above it. Things that I have noted here is the note at the bottom is that your alert through the TFS process is a decision point. Okay, a confirmed match requires immediate freezing. A confirmed match means that looking at the alert that's been generated and the individual or entity that it's been generated against versus the records that you have, you are confident beyond reasonable doubt that they are the same. The person listed on the TFS list and your customer that you have on your books or who is attempting to come on board on your books are the same. Therefore, you would, it's a true confirmed match, okay? And any assets that you have would need to be immediately frozen. Okay. In terms of a false positive, where it is a false positive, it still needs to be investigated, and the rationale for marking it as a false positive need to also be documented. Those are the sort of low-hanging fruit that regulators look at when they come in. They'll look at your false positives and say, right, okay, let me have a look at a sample and confirm that you've applied proper logic and application of mind when you mark those alerts as false positive. So, assessing TFS compliance, this is important for you guys, right? As compliance officers and people on the ground, typically this is what we find that regulators will look for when they're coming to assess whether or not you're compliant from a TFS perspective. Okay, keep your screening evidence to show that your clients are being screened on a daily basis and on an ongoing basis. Okay, keep evidence that you've recorded. If somebody was identified, part of the obligations when you identify somebody on a TFS list is to escalate internally and report to the FIU. Keep that as proof that you've reported. Right, show and keep as evidence how you've handled and managed that alert. If you're doing it manually, show that you received, you did your, and you probably keep evidence of it on an Excel spreadsheet or in some sort of Word product. Show that this is where you keep it. This is what your workflow was. You identified, you screened, you identified, you escalated it up the line, you reported to the FIU, and you're storing it on that client's profile that you keep. Keep the evidence of freezing and escalation, right? Yeah. We did not create case studies for TFS.
I just want to add a few things.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I'm not trying to complicate your lives, but I just want to share some experiences in terms of TFS. So, in a nutshell, what is TFS, right? Targeted financial sanctions. That means that there's lists out there that the regulator wants you to screen against to see if the person that you're going to establish a relationship with is that specific person, right? So there's a list. In terms of Zimbabwean legislation, and as a member of the UN, it's mandatory for you, it's legislative for reporting institutions to screen against the UNSC lists. So the UNSC, the UN has the UNSC lists, which has it's basically a list of names of people that's regarded as terrorists. Now they want you to screen against that list. Then there is other lists. There's about 10,000 lists out there in the world, right? There's lists in the EU. Every country has its own list. Malaysia, Australia, France, they all have their own lists. Then there's lists, local lists, and then there's lists at the UK HMT. There's an OFAC list. Now, practically, you need to understand which lists you need to screen against. What is important for you as a reporting institution? Number one, legislative, right? In terms of legislation, what is absolutely minimum? UNSC, that's what Zimbabwe says. You have to screen against that list. Whether you're doing it through a screening tool or you're doing it manually, you have to screen, right? And you have to have evidence that you screen your customers against that list. But now that list changes. Tomorrow they're going to change it. They add a name. Yesterday you screened your customer against yesterday's list. Maybe they put him on a list today. How do you know he's not added to that list? So there's a thing called ongoing screening. You need to think about ongoing screening. That's number two. That's number one, only mandatory lists. Number two is that based on your organization, there might be lists that are applicable to you because of the business that you deal with, that the business that you do, and businesses that you deal with in other jurisdictions. So, for example, if you're a bank or you have a parent or you're a subsidiary of an institution that is registered in the European Union or the UK, then it's going to be mandatory for you to screen against the EU list or the UK list. Then there might be lists that you as an institution feel that you don't want to do business with people that are on that list. For example, OFAC. Now, what's the difference? The difference is, number one, there's a legislative list, right? If you breach that, that is legislative non-compliance. Fine. Criminal liability. Fine, 3 months imprisonment, whatever the MLPC Act says. Number two is you defined lists in your risk management and compliance program or in your policy that you want to screen against in order to mitigate your risk. You don't comply to that. What happens then? Regulators see that as technical non-compliance. This is in your risk-based approach, but you're still not doing it. Fine. So it's important for you to understand what you want to screen against, what you should screen against, and are you doing that? Now, implementing a screening tool is not the be-all and end-all of TFS, because that screening tool subscribes to all 20,000 lists. So when you screen your client, Mr. Mohammed Sada or Mohammed Khan, that list is going to match him against all that 10,000 lists. Someone has to sit there and see, is this Mohammed and that Mohammed the same person? So these are the practical issues that you're going to have. So it's going to be important that you understand how you do screening and that your screening tool is optimized based on your screening requirements, technical and legislative. If you only need to screen against one list, screen against one list. If you want to screen against 4 lists, screen against the 4 lists. That needs to be understood and documented in your organization's risk management and compliance program. Okay.
Thanks for that. Amit. Okay. Right. Now the last item on the training schedule, and that is the session on EDDs. Let's try and get that done. Try not to make it too long. And trying to make sure that at least as a minimum, all the important bits get shared. Okay, so in terms of enhanced due diligence, okay, what are we talking about here? I'm gonna try and skip through the legislative requirements because again, this is something that you ought to know. But legislative requirements are going to be there uh, today, tomorrow. What we need to get through to you is how do you do it? How it is that you need to do it, what is it, how do you need to go about do it, when do you need to do it, what are the potential pitfalls and that sort of thing. So I'm going to try and get through to that, right? What is an EDD, right? So as compared to a CDD, right, customer due diligence, as they say, it applies through to a normal low-risk customer. It's obtaining information that you would see on on the customer, but at a very simple level and practically everything on that you'd get through on paper. Your EDD is your CDD with additional enhanced screening, with enhanced information that's required based on the fact that you've identified that there's potentially high risk factors linked to this customer. And you want to make sure, as an institution or as a compliance officer, that before you accept the risk that this individual or entity that's now high risk, before you accept that risk, that you understand what that risk is and that you've got in place controls to mitigate the risk that that particular customer poses. And that's what your EDD is all about. Okay, when is an EDD required? Okay, so when you're dealing with your politically exposed persons, if somebody comes up as a PEP on your screening, right? Where you're dealing with customers based or from high-risk jurisdictions, where you find yourself in a situation where you've got customers who are attempting complex or unusual transactions, right? Correspondent banking relationships, and higher risk customers. So higher risk customers are typically customers that are high risk because of certain occupations that they occupy as individuals, or they from certain high risk industries like gaming and gambling, casinos, um, yeah, mining and minerals. Okay, so those are all high risk industries and occupations which result in the customer being pushed up into a high risk category. Okay, so you need to, if you've got a customer in that that's high risk, you need to know that you've got controls in place to be able to mitigate the risk that that customer brings and exposes your institution to. And how would you go about doing that? What would those controls actually look like, right? So the EDD measures that need to occur, right? Enhanced entity identity verification. Okay, we know that we're going to have to do beneficial ownership, establishing ownership, but beneficial ownership verification. So verifying who those owners are. Then we bring in and request source of wealth information. Okay, as well as source of funds. Okay, so source of wealth is not necessarily information that would be required when you're doing a normal CDD on a customer. So a customer is normal low risk or medium risk, you wouldn't necessarily request source of wealth information. And we've got a slide showing you the difference between source of wealth and source of funds. So I'll explain that then. And you can't just onboard the customer without the necessary governance, right? It needs those high-risk customers, after you've done all of your checks and provided and documented what you've done and all of the risks as linked to that customer, you would need to submit that to senior management with a view in terms of whether you're comfortable to accept that risk, and that senior management then review that request for approval and then make that final decision in terms of whether to continue with the onboarding of the customer or maintain the relationship or to terminate that. Okay, source of wealth versus source of funds. Again, here, go through this that you'll have because you've got it on the slides. look at the differences between that. When is source of wealth required versus source of funds? What is source of wealth? Source of wealth refers um, to the inherent or the Amit, help me with the definition of source of wealth.
So, source of wealth is the origin of funds, but you need to think about it. Can I get a mic?
Yeah, use this.
So, source of wealth refers to the overall origin of the wealth of a specific individual or entity. However, that term is just used for convenience because when you think about it, you can say, what is the source of wealth of JJ as an individual? But have you ever heard anybody say, what is the source of wealth of Microsoft? Can an entity be wealthy? So we're looking at, when you refer to source of wealth of an entity, it's more about the capitalization of that entity. And wealth refers to the origin of the funds. So it's understanding where the funds or where the money has come from of that specific entity or person. And that's what source of wealth is. I know there's, I've been in practice, gathering source of funds is quite a difficult task. And I can stand here and give you some examples and scenarios that can help you to make it easier. But I'm happy to take that discussion offline after Niven has taken you through all the requirements.
Thanks, Amit. I think it's important, guys. If you want to understand, these waters and how to be able to navigate them safely, then have these conversations and discussions with Amit. He'll be able, like I said, he's happy to share his experiences with you. So, adverse media checks. All right. So, from a South African perspective, part of the checks that we do is, which is part of our enhanced due diligence, is to do adverse media screening on the customers. So when I did my research in terms of what is required from a Zimbabwean perspective, we realized that actually there's no such express requirement in Zimbabwean legislation that when doing your EDD that you do adverse media. There's nothing that says that you have to do it. From what I identified, I could be totally wrong and picked up the wrong search stream. Okay. But it's an important tool. And sorry, if somebody has a differing view on this in terms of it not being an express requirement in Zimbabwean legislation, please tell me now so I don't go on without knowing what the actual truth is. No. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, when you say adverse media coverage, is there like a benchmark whereby you are saying if it's something that somebody just writes about you on the negative on social media, or that which has been proven to be accurate and correct, or is just anything that's on the social platforms about you is considered? I just need some clarity on that one. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Yeah, so it's definitely not everything that's sitting on social media that refers to you in a negative manner. You could have personal attacks on you, people defaming you because you are a Man United supporter, whatever it is. But all of those things are not necessarily taken into account. As an institution, if you are doing adverse media screening or it's part of your screening regime, the process and what you would take into account when doing adverse media screening should be documented as part of your risk-based approach, right? You would need to state and stipulate that this is what our search strings include, so it's linked to financial crime, right? And it cannot be. So, for example, if you linked to domestic dispute, between yourself and your spouse. That should not affect you from an adverse media perspective on your EDD. Okay, so that's a typical example, but that needs to be documented so anybody coming in can see how it is that you as an organization conduct your adverse media searches. What are the what are the constraints within which you conduct that?
Sorry, I just want to add to that because adverse media screening it's quite a difficult control to get right. So if you think about screening, it's something that you do either at onboarding or you can do it as a part of due diligence, right? So if you're going to screen everybody for adverse media, let's, for example, say you're using a tool, that means you're going to have to discount all the news articles for everybody that you've screened, right? Otherwise, why are you doing it? So if I onboard 1,000 people a day, I'm going to get articles on 1,000 people a day. That means you're going to have to look at all those articles. So you can either think of adverse media as a screening, or you can think of it as a part of your due diligence. So if someone is determined as a high-risk client, then you perform adverse media, right? Then determining, and in terms of the gentleman's question, adverse media has to be defined. So you're going to define it. You're going to say, this is what I consider as adverse media. I'm only going to consider adverse media from reliable sources. This is what I consider to be reliable sources. I'm only going to take into fact, not allegations, but convictions. I'm only going to take into fact adverse media from the last 3 or 5 years. And this is how I'm going to rate it. So in practicality, that's how you have to look at adverse media. If you're going to do a Google search and use that to screen, then you need to use a search string. Because if I put someone's name in, you're just going to get every article on that person relating to everything. But remember, this is financial crime compliance. You want to limit your searches to a specific set. And if you want, we can also provide you some guidance on how to perform a search Google string on adverse media. So it just provides you relevant searches. Because think about if you put in a famous person's name, how much articles are you going to have to go through to get to the information just on financial crime articles? So there's a method that you can use. It's called a search string that will only bring you results that you want.
Thanks, Amit. All right, so ideally, if you in the organization, you'd need to keep and maintain an EDD template. Right, this is an example of an EDD template that you can use, and this is basically the template that gets populated once you are, when you're doing your ongoing due diligence on the customer, or you at the onboarding stage and you've got a customer that's high risk. Okay, so and these are the typical fields that you will have on that would need to be completed, and obviously there's a governance and oversight section where approval needs to be given for the continuation of that relationship. Okay, so that's all in the presentation, so you can keep, but if you need guidance in terms of how to put a template together, you can use that. All right, so common issues made. So your EDD is not being triggered. Okay, inadequate source of wealth assessments, inadequate source of funds assessments, weak or superficial risk understanding, lack of senior management approval. This is a big one, right? So that because it's a low-hanging fruit. It's the easiest thing for a regulator to come in and look for. You got these high-risk clients. Show me your list of high-risk clients. Show me your accompanying management approval. Why would the regulator come in if they're doing an inspection and go through everything when they can easily go through the lowest hanging fruit? Right, so if you've got high-risk clients on your books, make sure that you've got the necessary approval accompanying that.
Just explain in terms of senior management.
Yeah. So in terms of senior management approval, you as an organization need to define as part of that standard, of that EDD standard, who constitutes senior management, right? Because if you say senior management approval, and the regulator comes in and they don't see who you've defined, right, they're going to question you in terms of who is the senior manager? Is it a manager? Is it the managing director? Is it the executive manager? Is it board member? Who is it? Okay, so make sure that when you're putting this together as part of your procedure document, document who the senior manager, who constitutes senior management. All right. Ineffective ongoing monitoring. Okay, this is important. Ongoing monitoring is important, but it becomes ineffective if you're not doing it correctly. If you don't have triggers in place that show you that there's there's an ongoing due diligence date that you need to review this customer again. Typically, your high risk customers for whom you've performed EDDs would have a shorter review period that you need to look at, typically a year. So every year, all your high risk customers need to be reviewed again. But through that process, you're conducting transaction analysis of their transactions as well. Okay. And then poor documentation of the EDD. So easiest things for regulators to look for and find is where you've not documented the EDD process on certain high-risk customers adequately. All right, so the case study, and I'm going to take guidance here from Kuda and Marshall in terms of whether we hand this to the attendees and they can take it home and consider it. Or do you want to? Because I'm looking at the time.
It's fine. You're going back to SA. I'm remaining here, so I want to be popular. So I'll say let's share we've shared the case study.
Okay.
So they can go through it in their own time.
All right.
And actually, for all the case studies we have shared, I think they can even use it, isn't their own entities? That's the whole idea. So I think they can review and then discuss it in their own time.
Okay, great. So, guys, on this case study that's been shared with you, have a look at it. Incorporate that as part of your training modules back at your own institutions, so that people can learn and understand when looking at something how to do an EDD properly, how to complete your EDD template properly. What are the different requirements on that template? And then what additional items you typically request from the client that's missing. So those are important things. It tightens up your EDD process and ensures that everybody in that value chain knows what they need to do, how to do it, and when to do it. Okay, so we'll share that. If there's anything else, I think the EDD template, Marshall, you need to keep me honest. Did I share the EDD template that I created? Did I share it with you? If not, I'll share it with you now as well. Okay, I'll share that with him. So I've just created an EDD template that you guys can use as part of this exercise. Okay, so I am done for this afternoon. There's a question, sorry. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just want to check on the issue to do with PEPs. We've left office for so many years. It could be more than 10 years or so. Because I think the general understanding is that once a PEP is always a PEP in our guidelines. I don't know from the FATF whether there's any recommendation which gives guidance on those who have left office for long periods of time.
So let me take you guys through what happened erroneously in South Africa not too long ago. Is that in South Africa it was always a case of once a PEP, always a PEP. Okay, that's how we knew it. That's how I knew it. Growing in the AML environment within the banking industry, that's what we were taught. And then a couple of years ago, we suddenly were told, no. It's not once a PEP, always a PEP. You need to look at, take into account how long, or when that PEP has left office and how long they've left office for, and therefore, if they've left office for a certain amount of period, therefore the risk reduces, and therefore we can remove the PEP status. And then, lo and behold, discussions came back after I'm trying to think whether it was during mutual evaluation, where FATF came in and said, well, why are you doing? Why is it not always? Why have you guys changed it from once a PEP, always a PEP, to this, where you now defining the period within which a person can be a PEP, and thereafter he's not a PEP. So then South African legislators started to run and and scramble and do backflips and all of that, because now they had to go and reverse everything to go take it back to once a pep, always a pep. So that's how it is in South Africa at the moment, right? Once a pep, always a pep, because of the fact that Fatev is saying that's how it should be. Did I leave anything out? Yeah. So that brings me to the, if there's no other question, that brings me to the end of my session. I'm sorry that I know there's one of the slides that we put up earlier on SDRs, and that was in terms of managing your time when you are submitting your report so that you don't end up rushing. And I've done exactly that today. It's not a report, but it's rushing through the training, because time management on these things is never an exact science, unfortunately. So we try and do our best to get the message across in the best possible way. And Amit's done a sterling job in terms of his practical experience and sharing that with all of you, and even with me, right? And we're hoping that through all of that, you guys have had a great time and have absorbed as much as you can to take back with you to your respective institutions. And you leave here more empowered than what you were when you came in. Thank you.
I think we can do better. Great. I know we want to go home. Give us 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes. Everson, where are you? Yeah, you can come up. So Everson is just going to share from a practical point of view, as far as Zim is concerned, some of the challenges as far as EDD is concerned. Then thereafter, we wrap up.
Is it on my?
Yeah, so as they are setting up a onboarding, I'm sure you had the tool, right? That has been developed by FTI. Who is interested in getting more information? If you can raise your hand. If you're in the process of looking for a system, okay. Can I have someone to take down their details? Then we are going to arrange a special session where they can provide you with more information, the specs, and the pricing. As they indicated, they are flexible on pricing depending on your size, and people can come together, right? Entities can come together so that the price comes down. So if you're interested, please raise your hand up in the air. FIU team, can you go around and get the details so that we can then share with you more information and arrange a session where you get more information? This is critical. And in most organizations, they spend more time, more money in investing in technology in other areas. But when it comes now to air or safety, unfortunately, they don't spend money. But these systems will make your life easy. So please write you can even use your notebooks, write your email address, and contact number if you want. Then we'll collect the papers and then we will create, we'll contact you afterwards. I'm trying to buy time here. Everson, are you ready?
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. Great. So I'll hand over to Everson Gatsi, the head of compliance at FBC Crown. So he's just going to share some of the challenges they've been facing in practice. Then we pick it up from there.
Okay. No, that's fine. Thanks a lot, Kuda. And hello, guys. How are you, colleagues? So, unfortunately, I'm that guy who's standing in between your weekend and this session. So I'll try to whiz through the presentations. And already the work has been done exceptionally well by the FTI guys. So mine is just to bring it closer home in terms of the day-to-day challenges that we face when we practice EDD. So here I tried to explain what EDD looks like, but obviously I will not spend a lot of time on this because we've just touched on the core components of EDD. But I think what's important coming from a banking sector from a bank sector perspective rather, is who does what when it comes to CDD. And this is very important because you see that the bulk of the problems that we encounter actually stem from how we organize ourselves in terms of the obligations in executing EDD. So from most institutions, I understand that the work is split across with the relationship management team, the branches, collecting the documents, completing the EDD files, as well as the questionnaires and source of wealth forms, as well as verifying SAM. Then the sign-offs would then be done by the senior management. And in terms of legislation, when it comes to PEPs, the mandate lies with the highest office, which is either the CEO, managing director, or by whatever name they are called. But this is only limited to PEPs, meaning for other high-risk customers, the comment made by Nivan earlier on would apply to say, at least the standards have to define that. Then as compliance, and I know we do have a large number of compliance officers in here, compliance would then come in to review independently, challenge, as well as make recommendations when it comes to the approval process. So I think this has been said to say EDD has to be proportionate. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So even as I touch on some of the common challenges that we face, I'll also attempt to provide some of the workarounds to them. But again, it really depends on the context of your organization, on what you have assessed as your highest risk areas in terms of your institutional risk assessments, and then that should govern how you execute EDD in practice. So I'll skip this and then move to some of the key challenges that we face on the ground. So actually, the biggest question is who owns EDD? Is it a first-line responsibility or is it a compliance responsibility? In practice, we tend to see a lot of compliance officers being asked to do the due diligence, the next due diligence that is. But is that the correct approach? Then we also look at classification disputes. This I'm certain most colleagues would have faced a scenario where either the business, a head of a segment, or the managing director or CEO would disagree that this has to be a high-risk client or they are subject to EDD. And again, we have to look at how we can then also unlock that. Issues of source of wealth and source of funds, as well as governance and heightened monitoring. So in terms of who owns EDD, in practice, what we've seen happening is compliance in some instances then tends to collect the documents and build the files, as well as even making the recommendations. And in such instances, you get the first line stepping back and saying, compliance, go ahead with this. This is the reality that you face on the ground. And it's a massive problem. And why is it a problem? Because the segregation that I spoke of earlier on is there for a reason. So you find that the ownership of the controls and the process and the client relationship rests with the first line or the owners of the relationship. So they're supposed to do all those activities. And compliance's role will come in to then challenge, add additional conditions, and support, I guess, the approval by the approving authority. So these are things that we will have to insist on. And when regulators look at the segregation, they are also concerned about this. So this is a big challenge in practice that organizations face. Then there's also a scenario that I highlighted earlier on, when the business or the MD disagrees. In reality, we see this happening a lot. So it can be a system, it can be a tool that would have generated a client as a high risk. But we then find someone disputing that, especially the highest office or the guys who own the relationship. Usually it's because they bring in a lot of revenue, or they are very sensitive that no one wants to assign that label to them. So in practice, it's happening a lot. And even in terms of their stature as well, you then get those pushbacks. So how then do you navigate that? I guess this is a real life problem that we face. And one of the ways to do it is to try and focus on the risk factors and not necessarily the relationship. So if the client profile, their sector, and other elevated risk factors point to them being a high-risk customers, that's where the conversation should end. It's not about who the client is. It's not about their stature. it's not an issue of applying personal judgment. And again, your institutional risk assessment can help you. It can then act as the reference point. In this instance, you then say, when we did our institutional risk assessment, we identified these risk categories as high, and there was a reason for it. So now we just have to execute and follow that. So this is also one way where you can then sort of navigate around that challenge. Then obviously disagreements do happen, and I'm sure they've happened to most of us. It's also then important that where someone then wishes to override that decision or that risk classification, it has to be properly documented and escalated. So silence on a disagreement is not a risk management tool. If you then back off and remain silent, then you would not have adequately managed the risk. So these are real issues, colleagues, that we need to be alive to. Then a big one, especially in our market, we see a lot of this from PEPs and high-risk individuals where they flatly decline to share certain documentation. And usually they will then cite privacy and confidentiality. And again, this is where they can be difficult in that manner. But there are also instances where there are genuine reasons as to why they can't share, especially when you go to source of wealth and you want to verify or to corroborate that. You'd all appreciate that Zimbabwe has undergone a lot of currency reforms. So for you to properly build up a story as to how someone created or generated their wealth over time, it's not an easy exercise. So we have also to be alive to these issues. They impact us. And here we've also tried to suggest ways in terms of how to unlock that. One of it is where someone is a high-ranking official and perhaps they've been talking to someone low level. You might also want to try and rope in someone senior to then engage them for that information. Usually you then tend to get more results. But there are also other independent public verifiable sources that you can rely on. So there are listings on the Kamari registries, sometimes declarations or ZIMRA returns, where you can also try and piece up the story and build your knowledge on the client. Remember, all these things we do to properly understand the customers that we are dealing with. So every source, as far as it is credible and independent, can also help you with that. Then we also do note that there could be very difficult instances where even after trying all that, you still are unable to get a full story in terms of the client's source of wealth or any other documentation. And I know some organizations, in terms of their risk appetites, they then stop at that point and not continue. But depending on the organization, like I said, if you are not violating regulations and your controls are proportionate and they're effective, then if you are inclined to then documenting that rationale and explaining the gap properly, then perhaps you could also have demonstrated that you are managing risk. Then this one, spoke about it in terms of ongoing due diligence. I don't need to, I think, overemphasize on this. What we see, however, in practice is mostly sometimes a file is classified as EDD, approvals are sought, high risk, and then it ends there. It's almost forgotten at that point. So again, it's very important to acknowledge that there is need for ongoing due diligence, refresh some of the approvals, and where you have a governance committee dedicated at looking at some of these things, also refresh those approvals. Circumstances change. This is a life cycle in a relationship, so it's important that you then also move with the client. And then also there are things that happen. Yes, there can be an EDD, and depending on your cycle, maybe you review them annually after every 2 years. But in between those periodic reviews, there are some trigger events that, okay, you can file an STR on a customer, meaning at that point, it is also a trigger to then refresh your CDD or your EDD as it were. And there are also massive changes in circumstances or profile that you note, which also calls for trigger-based out-of-cycle reviews. So please, let's not just do EDD at once and then forget about it, because it's an ongoing obligation. Then in terms of the monitoring, when it comes to their transactions on an ongoing basis as well, what we tend to see in practice is that usually there is no distinction in terms of how we monitor EDD clients versus clients that are subject to the usual CDD. So low, high, medium, or by whatever rating you call them, they are still monitored the same way. And obviously this then also does not reflect a good risk-based approach. So what we then propose for those who use automated transaction monitoring systems, I think earlier on in the day, we also learned about the optimization and setting up of the rules. It's also important that you perhaps employ a different set of rules for those clients that are subject to enhanced due diligence. So you do this by applying tighter scenarios or lowering certain threshold that speak to the risk that they pose. You can also then want to obviously give more effort to the high risk related clients alerts, not to discount the others, but we know resources cannot be uniformly applied in an environment where you use a risk-based approach. And then for those that monitor transactions manually, there are also ways to do it. You can then do transaction lookbacks in a structured manner. You do this based on defined frequencies. You may want to do it monthly, or it can be quarterly, depending again on how you've assessed your risk from the onset. And as you execute these reviews, you then look at the volumes, the counterparties involved, the jurisdictions, and stated purposes. And you can draw some insights as to whether the relationship is performing as per your expected, as per the expected manner rather. Then also where then you come across, if you are doing the manual monitoring, where you then come across unexplained patterns, you might want then to refer them to compliance. So this just sums up what we've been discussing. I will not spend time on it. But what's important is these are the real life issues that we face. And we should move from just it being a tick box exercise, but actually to practicing some of the tenets of EDD. And just to rehash the main points, it's a collaborative effort. Roles differ, but the segregation is there for a reason. Classification is risk-based, and however disagreements go up, they don't disappear, they don't go away. Escalate to the right committees. And also where clients cannot share their source of wealth declarations or information or documents, at least know that you have to document the gap, the effort, and the ultimate decision taken in line with your risk assessments. Annual approvals are necessary. And one way to go around it is, I know when the system demo was done, it's a very excellent system because it provides for marking the next review date. This is very important because a lot of times, if you are not using a good system, you don't really know when to review next that client. And the challenge is you can't do it at one go as well, because otherwise the workload then becomes too hectic. So one way is you follow the usual periodic cycle if you have a system that marks the next review date, but annually you may want then to bring all those clients for approval at the right governance committee. So that way you know at least the senior management has considered those clients and they've okayed for you to continue the relationship. Then lastly, and very important, monitor proportionately. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Document, even evidence of nothing is still evidence. At least you would have documented that this is what we did. To the extent that it is in line with your policies and processes, it should be acceptable. Thank you very much. So, want to take questions?
So I don't know if there are any questions before Everson sits down. Any question or reaction? Great. This was brilliant. All right.
So for where there's a conflict between the compliance recommendation and management or the business, you're saying we should document where they've decided not to. Is there like a template? How do you do it in practice?
Okay, so
in a way that doesn't offend the business or management, especially.
Yeah, so I think in practice, conflicts will always be there. Disagreements will be there, certainly. I think one practical way to handle that is, obviously the approving authority might push back, but if you have a governance committee that oversees that financial crime risk or ML risk or whatever risk it is, then you may want it to be documented and recorded. It's also for a reason that compliance is an independent function. I think this is protected by the Banking Act as well. So where you then get to that disagreement, it's always good to have it stated. You are not going to be fighting with the person who owns the relationship or who owns the revenue or the business overall. But for good order, and I think in a respectful manner, it then also ought to be noted that, look, here the decision, that there was a disagreement as to the final decision. And then we proceed in that manner.
Cool. One more reaction if we have any. Okay, cool. Amit? No, okay, so Amit will come in, then we'll give him a chance at the end. Amit.
Yeah, I think that was a great presentation, and I think it's an important aspect that is highlighting in terms of, let's call it differences of opinion between business and compliance, because compliance gets known as the no man, right? You always say no, but I think it's important to understand that business always owns the relationship, and as long as that difference is not is not a legislative breach in terms of legislation. So you can't differ in terms of compliance and legislative requirements. But where there's a business conflict or differentiation, that has to be documented in terms of the governance procedures. So you remember in the beginning, I showed you in terms of risk-based approach, those 3 pillars and plus governance. Governance there will be determined. That will be documented in how you will deal with the difference of opinion. So normally where there's a difference, and let's say compliance says, I don't recommend that you establish a relationship with this person after we've done an EDD, business can accept that risk in accordance with the governance procedures. So as was mentioned, that must be documented, but that documentation must be in alignment with the governance process that's already been determined by senior management.
Thank you, Amit. I think we have one more comment from that end, isn't it? You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir. Yeah, I wanted clarity on when we're doing EDD on PEPs, that are we only limited to the PEP per se, or their relations, as in their spouse, children, friends, cousins, business partners, or what? How do we then evaluate to see this is the benchmark on where we end when we are doing EDD on a PEP?
Okay, I'll allow Everson to respond.
Okay, thank you for that question. So I think it depends on the relationship, right? So if it's at an individual level, and by definition, in terms of our act, you see that close family members, business associates, and so forth would then also be classified as PEPs by definition. So in that instance, if it's a son or a daughter of a minister, simplest example, then they are still a PEP. And you then have to employ enhanced due diligence. I guess in a separate forum, we've had a conversation to then say, does it necessarily follow that then they become high risk, or there could be also other categories? But what you don't escape is you still have to do EDD on them. And then when it comes to maybe it's a corporate structure, again, it depends on the role that they play. Are they a UBO? Are they a related party that you then need to screen? And also to then, if they are a related party, to what extent do they confer that PEP status to the organization? It's also now informed by your policies and approach to say, as you did your risk assessment, how would you do such scenarios? Because it happens a lot that someone who might not have ownership, or maybe they have control in an organization, and that one person then becomes a PEP, and the rest of the other owners and other key controllers, or other controllers rather, are not PEPs. So then there has to be a judgment call that is made in accordance with the organization's risk framework to say, then, does that one person confer ultimate PEP status onto the entity for then you guys to treat that as an entity?
Great. Thank you for the questions, the reaction, and the responses. Another round to Everson for a good presentation. Great. So we've come to the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for coming through. And we still have almost like a full house. I mean, this is probably the first time we have had this. So, Amit, I think, and it shows that you were delivering, isn't it? Thank you very much. So before we end, there were a few queries that came through. Earlier in the morning when we presented on the mutual evaluation process, some people were asking, so what are the ratings, right? So there are 4 ratings for all those 11 immediate outcomes, right? And if you don't do well on those 11 immediate outcomes, that's how now you end up being what? Gray listed, isn't it? So for you to pass, you should achieve 2, either substantial level of effectiveness or high level of effectiveness. That's the pass mark, right? If it's an exam, this is just me. Substantial level of effectiveness will be your 50% to around maybe 74%. Are we clear? That's a pass mark according to our standards. I know in SA for metric they have a much lower standard. But for Zimbabwe, pass mark is 50, isn't it? South Africa is what, 33%, isn't it? So in Zimbabwe, for you to have said you have passed, right, in almost all our exams is 50% and above, isn't it? So substantial level of effectiveness is 50% to 74. High level of effectiveness, in my view, will be 75 to 100. So when they say you have achieved high level, they are saying you only have minor deficiencies. Are we clear? When they say you have substantial level of effectiveness, you have moderate issues. Are we clear? Then there are the 2. Low levels of effectiveness, right, and moderate levels of effectiveness. So low levels, we are saying you have fundamental issues, right? Which means in my view, that's 0 to 24% thereabout, which for O level, I think that would be ungraded, isn't it? So for Zimbabwe, for us to get a low levels of effectiveness, it's equivalent to ungraded. It means that we have fundamental issues, right? Then moderate level of effectiveness is not a pass mark, right? You would have failed. It means that you have major, right? So it's below 50%. So we looked at those 5 issues: IRA, SGR, UBO, EDD, TFS, isn't it? And we said you as reporting entities, you're going to contribute to us getting rated on IO3, IO4, IO10, and 11. So you can even, do the math, so to speak, looking at your own institution. If you have not conducted an institutional risk assessment, what kind of a pass mark will you get there? Ungraded, isn't it? Low levels of effectiveness. If you're not submitting STRs, what are you going to get? Or your sector is not submitting STRs, what kind of a rating do you think Zimbabwe will get? If you are not identifying UBOs, or when they interview you next year, and then going back to my example, you end up saying, we are not getting the information from the company's office, what kind of a pass mark will be assigned to Zimbabwe? Right? And I'm hoping that question has been responded to. Are we all in agreement now that you don't necessarily need the information from the company's office when it comes to BO. The declarations, at least as far as the BO information is concerned. Are we clear? You can actually use the basic information. For me, UBO, you need to draw those diagrams, right? There's no way you can really identify without drawing the diagrams and going through all those processes we were shown. And you will notice that you as reporting entities, you're actually going to have more credible information when it comes to BO than the company's office. But now, if you are relying on company's office, guess what the assessors will say when it comes to IO5, IO3, and IO4. I hope we are all clear now. Then, EDD, if you have just said, if you're not applying enhanced measures on high-risk customers, what kind of a rating are you going to get for your entity, for your sector, and for the country? And it's linked to inherent institutional risk assessment. If you have not identified high-risk customers, products, services, geographies, channels, how will you now be able to identify clients that qualify for enhanced measures? It's clear, isn't it? Then TFS, if you're not screening or identifying sanctioned parties as far as the UN sanctions list is concerned, again, you can imagine what would be the rating. So someone were wondering why I was holding this apple, right? I don't know what were you asking, or the questions you had in your mind. As they say, an apple a day, what? Yes. So in my books, an STR a day keeps FIU away from your premises. So if there's anything, whenever you have an apple next time, just think of FIU. Are we all clear? So, I mean, if you are submitting STRs and we are getting them, I can assure you we will keep away. Because it means you are doing your what? But if you have 0 STRs, 0 CTRs, like for non-bank FIs and DNFBs, you have an obligation for a new return every month, isn't it? And the next submission is due by when? By the 10th of next month, isn't it? And you're not submitting those returns, you are assured we are going to knock on your door. And I'm sure a number of you, you've heard our knocks, isn't it? And some of you are ignoring those knocks. Because we've issued warning letters, right? And those warning letters are going to graduate. Very soon we'll be imposing fines, isn't it? Monetary fines. So please, if you don't want us to knock, visit your premises and STR a day. Are we all clear? The numbers are still low for non-bank FIs and DNFBPs. And we were taught on how to identify and report. So please report, because we are coming after all those entities that are not submitting. Then we continue to have problem children, right? These are compliant officers who do nothing. They've been appointed, right? They have the appointment letters and everything. And some, they even got a raise because of that appointment. But they are doing nothing. No IRAs. They are not doing CDD. You know what? We are coming. Then we have compliance officers who do not read, right? The requirements are there in the Act and in the guidelines, isn't it? Please read. When we go for inspections, the questions we get, we then wonder, do these people really read, right? Basic stuff, because it's there in the legislation, in the guidelines, isn't it? Then we have compliance officers who copy and paste, as we indicated earlier on. And when you ask them now, they have no idea what you're talking about. Then we have compliance officers who don't know what happens in the first line, right? A compliance officer for a bank, they have no clue what the relationship managers are doing who onboard customers. And the knowledge they have is theoretical. Spend time with your first line to understand all these things. Then we have compliance officers who moved away from advanced financial institutions or banks. And the requirements you were using, the policies were coming from group, right? Or from your corresponding bank relationship. Then you go to a small-sized entity or bank. Then you are imposing those requirements without understanding why those requirements were put in place at all, right? A good example, I'll pick on you, my brother Marshall. The one you asked on passports, right? So most of those requirements, they'll be covering other risks, not necessarily ML and TF risks, as indicated earlier on. I think Amit is the one who responded. So the risks you'll be trying to cover are not necessarily ML and TF. Like, for example, on CDD, the MOPC Act is clear. Identify and verify using a what? An identity what? Document, isn't it? But when we visit your premises now, we notice that you are going over and above the requirements. And there's a reason for it, and there are other risks you are trying to cover. For example, individuals. Is there a requirement for individuals to provide you with proof of residence? Which section is that in the MOPC Act for individuals? There's no such requirement as far as I'm concerned. Maybe I don't know how to read. I don't know. But the requirement is there. Maybe you're trying to address another risk type that is not MLTF. Because the standards, the FATF standards don't require it, and we are aligned with the FATF standards as a country. So for individuals, there is no such requirement. I'm just giving one example, isn't it? So let's comply, and remember, an STRI day will keep. So please, when the assessors come in, we are going to give them the statistics. Before I came up here, I just received the dashboard for this week. Some of the sectors, the STRI figures are not looking good. Let's report. And those numbers will help us get a good outcome. Thank you very much. So we've come to the end, but we just want to appreciate our guests. So we have some gifts that we want to extend to our guests. So I'll ask Sandra Jeche to come through from FIU Compliance, and the immediate past, is it president or chairman of BAS Compliance, to come through also and hand over our gifts. Then after that, we are free to go. If we can have Moira and Sandra to come through and hand over the gifts to our presenters. Let's give them a hand. So first up, we are going to have give the gift to Amit Ramirez Dayal. Let's give him a hand. Who is taking photos? You want someone to take a photo? Thank you. Next up, we have Nivandra Naidu. If you can come up and get your gift. Thank you very much. Let's give him a hand. Then representing our sponsors, Tatenda. Not sure if he's still around, Tatenda Mungu. I think he has stepped out. Marshall, you can receive on his behalf. Don't take it home, please. Okay. Oh, the V11. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's it from our end. Sandra, maybe you can wrap it up for us. But the slides are going to be shared. I know Marshall said you're going to share with everyone, but I've overruled him. We are going to share with people who are going to complete the feedback forms. Even if you don't have anything, just complete that form. And then the slides, all the examples, the case studies are going to be shared with you. Are we all clear? And we also share the contact details for FTI, so that if you want to have engagements with them, you can continue to have engagements with them. That's it from my end. Thank you. And remember, an apple a day will keep the daughter away, but an STR a day will keep FIR. We want those STRs.
Thank you so much, Kuda. Let's give him a round of applause. In actual fact, I thought Kuda was giving me an apple. but he gave me the mic. So imagine if Everson was standing between you and your dinner tonight. So I must be the villain today. So I will not take any of your time, but just to wrap up and say thank you very much to Amit and Nivan for the time that you were with us. We are really glad for that we were here, and we have learned a lot. I think everyone in the room can testify that today was a day well spent. And to you, Everson, thank you so much for the contribution. So imagine that we now have our own Amit in the room. So we are getting there. Before the assessors come, we are getting prepared for our, Kuda, did you say HS or high effectiveness or substantial? Which one are we getting?
If I get an SC, I'll be happy.
No, I think we'll get a high, given the work that we've had so far. So just to say thank you so much to the FIU team, to the administrators, and especially to our sponsors, Afreximbank in absentia. Thank you to everyone who has made it to this room and who have just taken time to be with us. So the journey does not stop here. Let's continue until we achieve our goal, until we've got our SE at the end of our mutual evaluation. So let's continue working together, and let's continue engaging, and let's continue submitting the STRs. I was going to say let's continue eating the apples, but it's okay. Let's continue submitting our STRs. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. This was such a great opportunity for us.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
I thought you were eating our apple.
No, I want a photo with this one.
Is it?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Thank you.
Just hey, JJ, drop this off. Okay. I'll give you a try. Okay, stay in touch.
Hi. Just a minute. Just want to have a photo taken.
Sorry, guys. I'll leave that here.
Before I forget. Marshall Sandra, you can come through.
Oh, you want to?
In the midst of the gents.